I was about 20 when I was offered a job by my friend to work for their parents' glass business. They installed giant glass windows in tall buildings and skyscrapers, not that it's too relevant to the story. The catch to the job was that I had to temporarily move to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, from Raleigh. My friend lived in Franklin, Tennessee, and I wanted to visit the family there and leave with them to go back down to Myrtle Beach. This was my first long-distance road trip and my first trip away from my immediate family. Back then, I was driving a puke green Ford Taurus, a car barely capable of getting groceries back home. But in my invincible youth, I didn't care about that. I was just so pumped to be spreading my wings and getting out into the world that risks didn't concern me. My mom and dad tried to get me to plan and pack better, knowing the trip would have its pitfalls. But it wasn't like the trip was going to take days, and fast food exists, so I wasn't stressing out about that. I mean, I'm not stupid. I packed for the trip and staying for a few months in Myrtle Beach, but they wanted me to bring food, water, emergency supplies, etc. I declined because it wasn't the 1940s, and of course there are gas stations at every exit. Plus, I had a razor flip phone. My thinking was, what could possibly happen on two busy interstates? It wasn't like I was going to some far-off country with no cell service. Anyway, fast forward to the trip. I'm a North Carolina boy, so I had no idea that Tennessee could get so cold, and I had no idea the heat was broken in my car. At first, I'm thankful because, by the time I reached Tennessee, I'm tired as hell and had made a lot more stops than I anticipated. I still had a few hours to go, and the cold air was keeping me awake. Finally, I pull off the interstate and start heading through these smaller numbered roads. The roads didn't have any conventional names like in North Carolina, they were just numbered, which I found odd. After driving on those for a bit, I started being sent down gravel roads. These were also the days of MapQuest, so I didn't have a GPS guiding me through the paved roads or rerouting me around roadblocks. I was starting to get hungry and thought back to my parents telling me to pack food. I should have listened. The sketchiest thing about MapQuest was that you just printed out the directions, you didn't have a map to fall back on. So, going out of your way to find fast food at an exit came with the potential of legitimately getting lost. So, I had passed a few signs telling me to turn off for food because I was tired and didn't want to chance it. Instead, I was looking for something off the side of the road that I could easily pull in and back out with no fuss, and more importantly, no risk of getting lost. My prayers were answered a little down the road when I saw a beat-up old country grocery store on my right-hand side. It didn't have a name, it just said grocery across the front of the white building. I pulled in because the light shining across the grocery sign was on, but I found it odd that most of the lights inside were off. This gave me the creeps a little but didn't stop me from going up to the door. I was starving, and maybe this was a 24-hour place. I saw a shadow move across the back of the lawn aisles as I approached the glass door and surprisingly opened it with ease. At this point, I half expected them to be closed due to the lack of lighting inside and hoped the owner would take pity on a tired traveler and let me grab some snacks. I called out, "Hello?" No one answered. I said something along the lines of, "I saw you when I pulled up and was hoping you're still open." Again, no answer. Now, this was really naive of me, but I assumed the owner was older and couldn't hear me. There was a constant buzzing sound coming from the back, or maybe he was deaf, so I went further back into the store. It honestly didn't smell great inside, and I hoped they had at least some chips or something. At least those are sealed. Suddenly, a man emerged from the back. "I'm so sorry, we were just about to close." "How can I help you?" he asked with a smile. He nearly made me jump out of my skin at first, but he seemed friendly enough. Not the old man I was picturing, but actually a younger guy, maybe in his 30s. "Yeah, I just came up from North Carolina. It's been a long drive. I was hoping you guys had something to eat for the trip." "We have plenty." "What are you looking for exactly?" he said without taking his eyes off of me. The guy had a weird unblinking stare that put me on edge, but what made me most uncomfortable was his smile. He smiled big, but his eyes never moved. The only way you could tell he was conveying an emotion was by looking at his mouth. the rest of his face stayed the same. Most people, you could tell they're smiling even if their mouth was covered because you smile with your whole face, not this guy. Yeah, just some chips, maybe a Coke. Do you have Doritos? Of course, he said, walking past me. He locked the door behind me before turning and smiling. Don't want anyone else walking in, he chuckled. Him locking the door was creepy, but I shrugged it off because the reasoning was sound, even though it felt off. Follow me, the guy said as he walked towards the back of the store. I was young, but I should have been smart enough to know that store owners generally don't give their customers a tour of the store. But I had lived a pretty sheltered life. I could feel that something was off, but I didn't want to offend by asking questions like, "What's that smell?" We got to the back of the store to where those plastic flaps hang that separate the customer's side from the back end when the man stuck his hand through, parting the plastic and saying, "Right this way." Now, alarm bells are starting to go off in my head, especially as he starts looking around and past me like someone who is selling drugs and watching out for the police. Back there? I ask and start to back up a little. That's when I notice the chips beside me on the aisle. Yeah, back here. We got our good stuff in the back. You can come take your pick. The guy noticed me and saw the chips and said, "Trust me, those are no good. I have way better stuff back here." By this time, I found the source of buzzing. Flies were flying over the meat section, and the dim light reflecting off of the packaging let me know that it's been sitting there for a while. "I'll just take this, if that's all right," I say nervously as I grab the bag off the shelf next to me and start backing up towards the door. He smiles, gesturing for me to head back. I fake pat my pockets and say, "Oh man, I forgot my wallet in the car. I'll be right back." As soon as the words left my lips, I spun around and did a light jog to the front, increasing speed as I approached the door. I made it to the door and twisted the lock a couple of times until I heard a click. I pushed the door open and turned back to look at where the man was, but he was gone. I jumped into my car and sped out of the parking lot and didn't stop again until I reached my friend's house. This happened when I was 7 years old with my twin brother and father. We had just entered our local grocery store, ShopRite, when a man no more than 10 feet in front of us glanced over and immediately whipped his head back towards us. As a quick side note, my twin and I at that age were always dressed in matching outfits, and we had long blonde hair that always got us looks of awe and affection. But this was different. He was a bulky middle-aged Middle Eastern descent man, and he stopped what he was doing to fully look at us up and down. A really husky smile crossed his scruffy face. My father paid no mind to this, as he was no stranger to creepy men himself. I immediately grumbled to my twin, Alex, about how creepy it was the way the man was looking at us. As we turned left to start going through the aisles, Alex and I turned and saw the man walking toward us with a shopping cart. When we first made eye contact, he immediately turned his attention to a table with baked goods on it, which kind of stood out to Alex and me more than if he had just kept walking normally. So, my father's obviously shopping, and Alex and I just keep glancing back, and we keep catching the man at the end of every aisle that we enter, just staring with no expression on his face. Even from a slight distance, he was seemingly breathing really weirdly. I also noticed that his cart continued to remain empty except for the baked goods he grabbed when we first looked back at him. We told our father, but he just rolled his eyes at us and told us that he probably thinks we're following him because we keep looking at him. The man disappeared as we hit the last of the aisles, and Alex and I were already on a completely different topic by now when we were heading for the registers, having almost completely forgotten about him within minutes. We were about to make it to the register when my brother asked my dad for a candy bar, and I quickly joined, to which he then angrily replied that we don't have the money for it. We were both pouting at this point, and he threatened to leave us as he began putting things on the conveyor belt. Then, Alex and I watched my father turn to face us again when his expression completely changed and his eyes shifted behind us. It was the man. He was sweating profusely at this point, and he was literally less than a foot behind us. Alex and I immediately took a step forward towards our father. The man laughed awkwardly, then apologized, saying, "Sorry, sir, I didn't mean to scare you kids. You're all just so beautiful." "These kids, are they yours?" My father kind of scoffed at this and then replied, "Yeah, they're mine." He did that same awkward laugh again, then said, "I couldn't help but notice that you don't have the money to get them what they want. How old are they? And you as well. I could help you. I have lots of money. Money's no problem for me." My father's face then furrowed in confusion and annoyance before snapping, Excuse me?" Like clockwork, he laughed again like it was some big joke, then said, "I'm serious. How much?" My father stared at him blankly for a moment, and he continued, "How much for the kids?" "I'd like both of them, but if you could only part with one, I could still make that work. I'll give you the money, just name your price. I can give them anything they want, any candy they want." He grinned yet again and wiped his brow, looking down at us. My father didn't respond to him, just looked at us and growled, "Here, now." So, we did as we were told, which was fine by us because we didn't want to be anywhere near this creepy man. The cashier was a teenage girl, no older than 17, and she was just completely wide-eyed, watching this conversation occur as she silently continued to scan our groceries. Once we were next to my father, he then growled at the man, "If you so much as lay one finger on my kids, I'll break it off and shove it down your throat," which were some pretty big words coming from my 5'10" father. The man's face darkened, and without even purchasing anything, he walked around the cash register and exited. But he didn't get far. The entire front of the store was glass, so moments later, we watched as he pressed his face against the glass, trying to see in, leaving a sweaty face print behind. At this point, the cashier was alerting her manager and asking him to call the police. My father immediately assured them that that's not necessary and just asked the manager to walk us out to his car. We saw no sign of the man as we unloaded our groceries and hopped into the car. My father quickly drove us home once we sat in the car for a few minutes, scanning for any signs that he might be waiting in a car or something. We eventually made it home safely, and nothing ever came of it. I don't know what happened to the man, but I truly hope he never convinced anyone to give him their kid. That's absolutely horrific to think about. I am a mother of 3, and consequently, our grocery bills tend to be quite high. My husband works at a tech company, while I currently stay at home tending to our 10, 7, and 3-year-old kids. I find myself going food shopping at least twice a week, usually opting for the nearby food town, although I occasionally visit the nearby Walmart as well. These are just 2 of the limited grocery store options in our quiet town. To provide some context, we are a Mexican family, and I am currently 36 years old. The incident I'm about to share occurred less than a year ago when I was 35. On one particular day, I found myself running behind on my shopping schedule, prompting me to head to the store much later than usual. The Food Town store usually closes at 10, and it was well past 9 o'clock by the time I rushed over with my flyers and coupons. My children were complaining about the lack of food at home, so a quick grocery run was necessary. Most days, I had to take my 3-year-old son, Leo, with me, but on this occasion, I was fortunate enough to go shopping alone, an uncommon luxury. Upon arriving at Food Town, I noticed it was unusually empty at this hour given that closing time was approaching. I grabbed a cart and began swiftly navigating the aisles, grabbing items from my list and taking advantage of any ongoing sales. I found myself in the cereal aisle when I suddenly felt a tap on my shoulder, which startled me. I turned around to see a man of similar height with a tan complexion, wearing a baseball cap, black coat, red zip-up hoodie, and jeans. He apologized for startling me and explained that he had been searching for a specific bag of chips that happened to be in my cart. He politely asked where I had found them. I kindly directed him to the aisle where I had picked up the chips, and he expressed his gratitude, although his breath was quite unpleasant. As I was about to head back to my cart, he initiated a seemingly pointless conversation about his fondness for those particular chips. He mentioned something trivial about the ingredients or the absence of a specific ingredient. Despite my efforts to signal my intention to return to my shopping, he continued talking. It was during an awkward pause that he suddenly commented, "Gosh, you're pretty." I responded with a quick thank you and attempted to politely end the conversation, explaining that I needed to continue my shopping before the store closed. I made my way back to my cart, but to my surprise, the man followed me and continued talking. At this point, I straightforwardly expressed my desire to shop in peace. He seemed to finally understand and walked away. Nevertheless, throughout my time in the store that evening, I couldn't help but notice him repeatedly circling the aisles. Every time he passed the aisle I was in, he would slow down or stop, his gaze fixed on me. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I hastened my shopping. When I finally finished, I headed to the checkout. To my dismay, the man appeared again, this time with just a few items, and stood in line right behind me. He remained silent, but I could feel his gaze on me even without looking. Once I was done checking out, I pushed my cart away, and the man called out, "Have a good night, Mom." I chose to ignore his comment and proceeded to unload my groceries into my car. As I glanced around, I noticed the man in the red hoodie sitting in his old, dilapidated Toyota, which must have been at least 30 years old. He didn't start the car, just sat there watching. After loading my groceries, I started my car and began to drive out of the parking lot. I checked my rearview mirror a few times and saw no headlights behind me, which gave me a sense of safety. However, it wasn't until I reached my driveway that I realized something unsettling. A car with its headlights off was slowly approaching down the street, curiously stopping a few houses down, reminiscent of the same old Toyota from the parking lot. Upon reaching home, I immediately called out to my husband, who came downstairs looking concerned. I shared with him that I had been followed home by a disturbing individual. He rushed outside to the stoop, but by then, the car had disappeared. The following weekend, during the late hours of the night, while we were all in bed, we heard rustling outside in the side yard. I nudged my husband, prompting him to investigate. As he opened the window, he spotted someone attempting to open the side gate to our backyard. The individual was startled by the sound of the window sliding open and fled. My husband retrieved the baseball bat and dashed outside, but the person was already gone, having sped away in a car. The description my husband provided matched the man in the red hoodie and the old Toyota from before. We immediately contacted the police, and an officer arrived promptly at our house given the late hour. I provided the best description I could of the man and his car. Although he never returned to our house, the unsettling feeling of having a stranger like that know our address continues to linger. The presence of my angry husband with a bat likely deterred any further unwanted visits, but the discomfort remains.